Orbital Dock 317 was not a place where dreams came to die. It was where they came to rot. Slowly, under the relentless radiation of a dying star. Jace hung upside down, 200 feet above the primary docking ring, his magnetic boots locked onto the pitted gray hull of the station. Below him, or above him depending on how one oriented themselves to the artificial gravity plating, the void stretched out in an infinite, uncaring tapestry of black velvet and distant cold diamonds. The silence out here was absolute, a heavy blanket that pressed against the seals of his vac suit, broken only by the rhythmic hiss of his own breathing and the static crackle of the comms loop in his ear. He twisted his hydro spanner, grunting as the corroded bolt finally gave way, sending a puff of crystallized oxidation floating into the vacuum. So much for the glamorous space life, Jace muttered into his helmet microphone, his voice thick with the weary sarcasm that had become his primary defense mechanism against the universe. See the galaxy, they said. Meet interesting species, they said. Nobody mentioned you would be scraping barnacles off a sewage recycler in the armpit of the outer rim while your credit account hovered at 0. A burst of static answered him. It was Sal, the station's port controller, whose voice sounded like gravel grinding in a blender. Quit your whining, Jace. You are charging double for hazard pay. Just fix the seal before the atmospheric scrubbers vent pure methane into the promenade. I am not whining, Jace retorted, wiping a smudge of grease from his faceplate, though the gesture was futile. I am providing critical commentary on the socio-economic state of this rusted tin can. And for the record, hazard pay implies there is a hazard. This isn't hazardous. It is just depressing. There was a pause on the line, and then the tone of the static changed. It grew sharper, more urgent. Clear the lane. Jace, we have an incoming signature. Big one. Jace frowned, glancing over his shoulder. Traffic at Orbital Dock 317 usually consisted of automated freight drones that looked like flying dumpsters and the occasional smuggler runner held together by duct tape and prayers. Define big, Jace said. Expensive, Sal replied. Astronomical money. Jace turned his head just as the space warped. It did not arrive like a normal ship. Standard vessels tore out of hyperspace with a violent rending of physics, a flash of Cherenkov radiation, and a mechanical scream. This ship arrived like a diver breaking the surface of a dark pool. One moment there was nothing but star fields. The next, a shadow detached itself from the void. It was a living yacht. The hull was not metal plates and rivets, but a smooth, seamless expanse of obsidian chitin that seemed to ripple like muscle. Bioluminescent veins pulsed beneath the surface, shifting from deep indigo to a warning crimson before settling into a calm, rhythmic violet. It was sleek, predatory, and achingly beautiful against the backdrop of the rusted industrial station. It looked like a panther stalking through a junkyard. Whoa, Jace breathed, his cynicism momentarily suspended. That is bioengineered, high-end Tethai Grotech. What is a ship like that doing in a dump like this? Port control orders came through, cutting off his wonder. Docking request Alpha 1. Priority clearance granted. Jace, get down there. The pilot is requesting a manual assist for the umbilical connection, specifically asked for the head mechanic. Jace groaned, releasing his maglocks and letting his tether reel him back toward the airlock. I am the only mechanic. Sal. Do not make it sound like a title. Just get down there, and try to look like you have washed your suit in this fiscal quarter. As Jace transitioned through the airlock, the hiss of pressurization filling his ears, the sight of the sleek alien ship triggered a sensation of déjà vu so strong it nearly made him stumble, the violet light pulsing from the vessel's hull. He had seen that color before, not on a ship, but in eyes. Eyes that were terrified, defiant, and burning with a will to survive that terrified him. The memory hit him like a physical blow, dragging him back 10 years. He was 18 then, a scrawny kid who had just inherited his father's toolbox and a mountain of debt. He was sitting on a crate near the lower market promenade, nursing a nutrient drink that tasted like wet chalk, watching the crowd. The station was busier back then, a chaotic crossroads for refugees fleeing the border wars. That was when he saw her. She was stealing. It was not a subtle theft, but it was desperate. A skinny alien girl, no older than 16 by human standards, was snatching a protein loaf from a vendor's stall. She was distinct, her species rare in this sector. Her skin was iridescent, shifting colors slightly as she moved, and she wore a translucent cloak that did nothing to hide the faint bioluminescent markings glowing on her collarbone. She looked feral, cornered, and starving. "Hey!" the vendor shouted, a large Tellarite with a stun baton. The girl bolted, but she was weak. She stumbled over a crate, the stolen loaf skittering across the deck plates. Security drones, hovering overhead like angry hornets, immediately locked onto her heat signature. Their sirens wailed, red lights bathing the promenade in panic. Subject identified. The drone's synthetic voice blared, "Halt!" She froze, backing against a bulkhead. Her eyes, violet, luminous, and wide with panic, darted around the crowd. No one moved. The people of the station learned early not to interfere with station security. Jace did not think. He just moved. He slid off his crate, intercepting the lead drone just as it primed its shock emitter. He held up a data pad, flashing a maintenance override code he had hacked weeks ago to get free shower credits. "System error!" Jace shouted, pitching his voice to sound authoritative yet bored. "This unit is misfiring, resetting targeting parameters." He slammed a command into the drone's access port. It wasn't a graceful hack. It was a brute force reboot that made the machine shudder and drop out of the air for a solid 5 seconds. The vendor yelled in protest, but Jace was already moving toward the girl. He placed himself between her and the crowd, blocking their view. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his last ration bar, the good kind, with actual chocolate coating, and shoved it toward her. "You are safe now, okay?" he said softly, his hands up, palms open. "I scrambled their sensors. Just take it and go. I will help you." He expected gratitude. He expected relief. Instead, the girl looked at the ration bar, then at his face, and her expression twisted. It was a volatile mix of shame, fury, and agonizing pride. She was royalty in rags, a creature who had lost everything but her dignity, and his charity seemed to burn her. She wrenched away from him, her back hitting the metal wall. Her chest heaved. "I don't need you," she screamed. The voice was melodious but cracked with strain. It echoed through the promenade, silencing the murmurs of the crowd. "I don't need you," she shouted again, the words ringing with a fierce, wounded independence. Yet, even as she screamed the rejection, her hand snaked out, her fingers trembling violently, snatched the ration bar from his palm. She clutched it to her chest like it was a lifeline, her knuckles white. She looked at him one last time, those violet eyes searing into his memory, and then she vanished. She slipped into a ventilation shaft that had been pried open, disappearing into the station's shadows. Jace stood there, the echo of her voice lingering in the stale air. "I don't need you." Words that would haunt him long after she vanished, echoing in the quiet moments of his life for a decade. Long before she would return, years later, rich, to thank him. Later that night, the teenage Jace had done something reckless. He had accessed the station's central security mainframe. It took him 4 hours to bypass the firewalls, but he found the footage of the theft. He found the biometric scans the drones had taken. Subject, unidentified. Species, high-value asset. Status, priority capture for Heliox Dominion. Jace felt a chill run down his spine. She wasn't just a refugee, she was prey. A corporate manhunt was underway for her. He deleted it. He erased every frame of video, every byte of biometric data, every log entry that proved she had ever been on the station. He scrubbed the drives until they were clean, unknowingly erasing her from the galaxy's most sophisticated tracking network. He never saw her again. He assumed she had died in the chaos of the Outer Rim Wars. Just another spark extinguished in the dark. The memory faded as the airlock cycle completed with a heavy metallic thud. The hiss of equalization brought Jace back to the present. He stood in the docking bay of Orbital Dock 317, clutching his helmet under his arm, running a hand through his sweat-matted hair. The ramp of the living ship descended silently. It did not whine with hydraulics, it extended like a tongue, smooth and organic. Vapor curled around the opening. Then, she stepped out. If the girl in his memory had been a flickering candle, the woman standing before him now was a supernova. She was tall, poised with a terrifying grace. She wore a suit of shimmering exosilk that clung to her form like liquid mercury, the fabric shifting in opacity with her movement. The biotech filigree woven into the material glowed in sync with her pulse. Soft, rhythmic beats of azure and violet. Her skin was polished, iridescent and perfect. Her features, once sharp with hunger, were now refined and regal. She was devastatingly beautiful. She was also clearly the most powerful person within 10 parsecs. Jace stared. He didn't recognize her. How could he? The feral child was gone, replaced by this titan of industry and elegance. His first instinct, as always, was to hide behind a joke. He stepped forward, forcing a lopsided grin, trying to play the part of the charming, rugged mechanic for the high-paying client. "Welcome to the Rust Bucket," he said, hooking his thumbs into his tool belt. "Docking fee is standard, but for a ride like this, I usually charge a smile and a signature." He waited for the eye roll, the dismissal, the cold demand to speak to a manager. Instead, the woman froze. Her nostrils flared slightly as the sound of his voice reached her. She turned her head, locking eyes with him. A flash of recognition sparked in those violet depths, instant, electric, and followed immediately by a flicker of old, hot anger. "Jace," she said. The name hung in the air. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Jace stumbled, his boot catching on a floor grate. He righted himself, his grin faltering. "I am sorry. Have we met? I usually remember clients who look like they own the nebula." She did not smile. She descended the ramp, her movements fluid, eating up the distance between them. Up close, the sheer presence of her was overwhelming. She smelled of ozone and rare spices, a scent that cut through the station's pervasive odor of recycled air and grease. "Come with me," she commanded. It wasn't a request. She turned and walked back up the ramp, expecting him to follow. And for reasons Jace couldn't quite articulate, curiosity, fear, or the lingering ghost of a memory he hadn't yet placed, he followed. The interior of the ship was like stepping inside a living jewel. The walls curved organically, pulsing with gentle bioluminescence that mimicked a starry night. The air was rich and oxygenated. They walked in silence to a private lounge where the entire wall was a holographic projection of the local star system, filtering out the debris and making the dying sun look majestic. She turned to face him. Jace stood awkwardly in his stained jumpsuit. his magnetic boots leaving faint prints on her pristine floor. "You have done well for yourself," Jace said, gesturing vaguely at the opulence. "I take it you are not here to sell Girl Scout cookies." She tapped a console on her wrist. A holographic display materialized in the air between them. It showed a bank transfer. "I just purchased the station's debt," she said, her voice cool and melodic. "All of it. The docking fees, the reactor maintenance loans, the overdue water taxes. I transferred the funds 10 seconds ago." Jace blinked. "You bought the debt? That is 4 million credits." 6 million considering the interest, she corrected. "Your port controller is currently hyperventilating. I expect he will be speechless for the next hour." "Why?" Jace asked, the humor draining out of him. "People like you, astronomical money, as Sal put it. You do not fly all the way out to the fringe just to bail out a dying truck stop." "I am a portfolio emissary for the Tethai Compact," she said. "I manage investments for the High Council. We are expanding our interests in this sector." She took a step closer. The bioluminescent markings on her neck flared brighter, a betrayal of her calm demeanor. "But that is not why I am here." She reached out, her hand hovering near his face. Jace flinched, instinctively. She paused, her eyes searching his. "You really do not know who I am, do you?" she whispered. Jace looked at her. He looked past the expensive exosilk, the jewelry that cost more than his life's earnings, and the aura of command. He looked at the eyes. Violet, luminous. The memory of the ration bar slammed back into him. The shout. "I don't need you. Lyra?" he breathed. The name surfaced from the deep recesses of his mind. A small, tight smile touched her lips. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had won a war but lost too many soldiers. "You remember," she said. "That was 10 years ago," Jace stammered, his mind reeling. You were a kid. You were starving. I thought you died." "I should have," she said simply. "I would have?" "But someone wiped my face from the security archives. Someone deleted the ID tags that the Heliox Dominion was using to track me." She walked over to a wet bar that grew out of the floor like a sculpted mushroom and poured 2 glasses of a shimmering blue liquid. "I checked the logs years later. Jace, I know what you did. You erased me. That act is the only reason I am standing here today, and not in a genetic harvesting lab on a corporatist moon." She turned back, extending a glass to him. "I came to settle a debt." Jace took the glass, his hand shaking slightly. "This is insane. You came all this way to say thank you?" "No," Lyra said, her gaze sharpening. "Rich aliens do not fly all the way out here just to tip the mechanic." "I need something." "Ah," Jace said, taking a gulp of the drink. It tasted like sunlight and alcohol. "There it is. The catch. I need an engineer," she said, "and I need a bodyguard." Jace let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Look at me. Lyra, I am a grease monkey. I fix trash compactors. I am not a soldier. You have enough money to hire a battalion of mercenaries." "Why me?" "Because mercenaries have allegiance to whoever pays them the most," she countered. "And political appointees have allegiance to the council. I am walking into a situation, Jace, a conspiracy." She tapped the air, and the hologram changed. It showed the logo of the Heliox Dominion, a massive predatory megacorporation, superimposed over a map of her homeworld. "My people's ruling council is in bed with Heliox. They are selling mineral rights, but the ledgers do not add up. There are whispers of security reforms that are nothing more than a prelude to enslavement. I need to investigate." I need to go to places where a high-profile emissary cannot be seen. She stepped closer again. The romantic tension was sudden and sharp, pricking the air like static electricity. I need an outsider, she said softly. Someone who has no political allegiance. Someone who has proven, historically, that they will protect me without trying to own me. You are the only person in the galaxy who fits that description. Jace looked down at his boots. The weight of her words pressed on him. He felt exposed, his simple life of sarcasm and repairs suddenly looking very small and very safe. This sounds dangerous, he said. It is lethal, she agreed. She raised her hand again. This time, she didn't stop. She reached out with a small, metallic device in her palm, a scanner. She brought it close to his temple, near his old military surplus neural implant. I need to calibrate your implant to my ship systems if you are going to fly with me, she said, her voice dropping an octave. She leaned in. She was too close. He could feel the heat radiating from her skin. As she worked the scanner, the soft brush of her bioluminescent markings grazed his cheek. It felt like a low-voltage current, strange and intimate. They both jerked back as if burned. Lyra cleared her throat, her cheeks flushing a deeper violet. Her composure cracked, just for a second, revealing the girl who had been terrified of needing anyone. Humans, she murmured, recovering her dry wit, fragile when touched in the wrong frequency. I forgot about your primitive nervous systems. Jace rubbed his cheek, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Yeah. Well, he managed to choke out. We are not all made of light and magic. Lyra stepped back to the window, her silhouette framed by the stars. The power dynamic settled back into place. But the air in the room had changed. It was charged now. I am offering you a salary of 50,000 credits a month, she said, looking out at the void. Plus a signing bonus large enough to buy your own ship. You can leave this decaying station forever. You can see the galaxy. Jace, the real one. Not just the rust. She turned her head slightly, throwing a wicked smile over her shoulder. Or you can say no. I will find another human to thank. There must be plenty of mechanics in this sector who can handle a hydro spanner. Jace looked at her. He looked at the confident set of her shoulders. The impossible wealth. The danger lurking in her request. He looked at the way she held herself, like she was ready to fight the entire universe. Just like that starving girl in the market. He thought about the hull of the station. He thought about the silence. He thought about dying alone in a gray room. Then he thought about the way her hand had shaken when she took the ration bar 10 years ago. You are bluffing, Jace said quietly. Lyra turned fully, raising an eyebrow. Am I? You wouldn't trust another mechanic. You just paid 6 million credits to clear a debt you didn't owe. Just to get into a room with me. You are not looking for a human. You are looking for me. Lyra held his gaze for a long moment. The mask slipped. The rich, powerful emissary faded, and he saw the woman beneath, lonely, driven, and carrying a burden too heavy for one set of shoulders. She turned back to the observation window, her voice barely a whisper, though in the quiet lounge, it sounded like a shout. I thought I didn't need anyone, she murmured to the stars. I was wrong. Jace unclipped the magnetic tether from his belt and let it drop to the floor with a heavy clang. It was the sound of an anchor being cut. When do we leave? He asked. Stepping aboard the Ethelgard was less like entering a vehicle and more like being swallowed by a benevolent, high-maintenance beast. Jace hesitated at the threshold of the airlock. The hull material, a matte black substance that seemed to drink the ambient light of the docking bay, rippled under his palm. It was warm to the touch, vibrating with a low, thrumming pulse that felt uncomfortably like a heartbeat. "Do not pet the hull," a voice said. "It tickles." Jace jerked his hand back, looking around the empty corridor. The voice had not come from a speaker. It had resonated directly against his eardrums, crisp, dry, and distinctly amused. "I am not petting it," Jace said, stepping fully inside. "I am conducting a structural integrity check. Who are you? The autopilot? I am the consciousness of the vessel," the voice replied. "You may refer to me as AI's one, or simply the ship. And please wipe your boots. The cleaners are biological scavengers, and they get indigestion from industrial grease." Jace looked down at his magnetic boots, which were indeed leaving faint oily smudges on the pearlescent deck. He grimaced and scuffed them on a friction pad near the door. "Great," Jace muttered. "Even the spaceship has an attitude. I am going to fit right in." The interior of the yacht was a study in contrasts. The architecture flowed in organic curves, lacking the harsh angles and welded seams of human engineering. The walls breathed, expanding and contracting rhythmically, glowing with a soft, amber bioluminescence that shifted to a calming teal as Jace walked down the corridor. Yet overlaying this biological wonder were hard, light holographic interfaces and weapon mounts that looked distinctly lethal. "You are the mechanic," the AI said, its voice following him as he headed toward the bridge. "I have scanned your neural profile. It is chaotic, high stress markers, elevated cortisol, and a surprising amount of useless trivia about combustion engines." "I am eclectic," Jace countered, "and combustion engines are vintage. They have soul, unlike grown ships that complain about tickling." "I like him," the AI observed, presumably speaking to Lyra now. "He is delightfully primitive, like a golden retriever with a wrench." Jace stepped onto the bridge just as the Ethel Guard detached from the rusted clamps of the station. The view was magnificent. The entire forward bulkhead was transparent, offering an unobstructed view of the stars streaking into lines of light as the warp drive engaged. The sensation of acceleration was non-existent. The ship's inertial dampeners were flawless. Lyra stood at the center of the room, her hands hovering over a liquid light display. She had changed out of her diplomatic exosilk into something more practical but no less expensive, a form-fitting bodysuit of dark weave that highlighted the iridescent patterns on her skin. She did not look up as he entered. "We are breaking orbit," she said. "Estimated time to the Heliox perimeter is 48 hours. We have work to do." Jace leaned against a bulkhead, crossing his arms. "So, are you going to tell me why a Tethai emissary is sneaking into a corporate shipyard? Or is this a need-to-know mission where I die at the end?" Lyra swiped her hand through the air, and the star field on the main viewer shrank, replaced by a rotating holographic planet. It was a water world, glowing with bioluminescent oceans and crystal archipelagos. "This is my home," Lyra said, her voice tight. "Tethys Prime." She tapped the air, and the image zoomed in, overlaying the pristine oceans with angry red grids. "The Heliox Dominion is not just buying mineral rights. Jace, they are buying us. They have signed a provisional treaty with the High Council to provide security reforms. They claim it is to protect us from raiders." "And let me guess," Jace said, stepping closer to the hologram. "The protection racket turns into an occupation." "It is worse," Lyra said. She expanded the data stream. A ledger appeared, filled with complex alien script and human numerical figures. "I intercepted this 3 weeks ago. It is a shadow ledger from a Heliox transport. It details bribes paid to 3 high-ranking council elders. But look at the cargo manifest." Jace squinted at the floating text. His reading of galactic standard was good, but the technical jargon was dense. Biological samples? Jace asked. Biogenetic samples, Lyra corrected. DNA, thousands of distinct genome sequences harvested from the population. They are not just mining our planet, they are mining our biology. My people possess unique adaptive traits: bioluminescence, radiation resistance, neural density. Heliox is harvesting us to breed super soldiers or patent our genes for medical tech. Jace felt a cold knot form in his stomach. This wasn't politics, it was trafficking. And the council knows? Lyra's face hardened, the violet light in her eyes darkening. Someone on the council does not just know. They arranged it. She turned to him, the vulnerability he had glimpsed earlier buried under layers of cold resolve. When I was a child, Jace, when I was hunted on your station, I always wondered how Heliox found me so quickly. I was careful. I was invisible. But they knew my biometric signature. Someone close to me, someone who had access to the royal creche, gave them my data. I was the prototype. She let the word hang in the air. Prototype. So we are going to the shipyard to find out who sold you out, Jace concluded. We are going to the shipyard to find the smoking gun, Lyra said. I need proof of the illegal warship program. If I can show the council that Heliox is building dreadnoughts designed to suppress our atmosphere, the treaty will collapse. The moderate elders will turn against the collaborators. And that is where I come in, Jace said. Lyra nodded. Heliox employs thousands of human contractors in the Outer Rim. It is cheaper than automating everything. You are going to be my human consultant. We need to insert a dormant code into their manufacturing queue, a virus that will ping every time a ship with illegal specs comes online. She looked him up and down, a faint smile touching her lips. Your rough edges will finally be an asset. Jace, you talk like a mechanic. You walk like you are tired of gravity. You will blend in perfectly with the workforce. Thanks, Jace drawled. I try to cultivate an air of professional exhaustion. Over the next 2 days, the Ethelgard became a small, moving world for just the two of them. The tension of the mission hung over them, but the sheer absurdity of their pairing began to crack the ice. It started with dinner. Lyra insisted on sharing meals in the observation lounge. It was a formal affair, with the ship dimming the lights to match the Tethai evening cycle. Jace sat at a table made of grown crystal, staring down at a plate of what looked like blue spaghetti, except the spaghetti was moving. It is a delicacy, Lyra said, watching him with concealed amusement. Gag root noodles, they are not alive, technically. They just react to thermal changes. Jace poked the pile with his fork. A noodle writhed and wrapped itself around the tines. Technically, Jace repeated. That is a word doing a lot of heavy lifting. In my culture, we prefer our food to have accepted its fate. He took a brave bite. The texture was akin to chewing on a rubber band that was trying to escape his teeth. He chewed, grimaced, and swallowed with a visible effort. Notes of desperation. Jace choked out, reaching for his water, and a finish of wet socks. Lyra let out a sound that was half laugh, half snort. She immediately clamped a hand over her mouth, her eyes widening. Did the emissary just snort? Jace asked, grinning. I think that is a violation of intergalactic protocol. I did not snort, Lyra said, though her cheeks were shimmering with a flustered pink bioluminescence. The ship's atmospheric pressure shifted. Sure, Jace said. Blame the ship. I heard that. The AI interjected smoothly. And for the record, the pressure is optimal. The emissary merely has a primitive reaction to humor. It is charming, in a rustic sort of way. Lyra glared at the ceiling. I am going to reprogram your vocal centers to only speak in binary. Then came the training. The shipyard infiltration required Jace to move differently. Teeth-eye combat was fluid, based on redirection and momentum rather than brute force. To teach him quickly, Lyra suggested a neural overlay session. They stood in the ship's dojo, a circular room with padded walls. Lyra attached a small node to the back of Jace's neck, right over his implant, and placed a matching one on her own skin. "This will allow you to feel what I feel," Lyra explained, her voice all business. "Muscle memory transfer. Do not fight the sensation." She tapped her wrist console. The world dropped away, suddenly. Jace felt two bodies. He felt his own heaviness, his planted feet, but overlaid on that was a sensation of lightness, of coiled power. He felt Lyra's heartbeat as if it were thumping in his own chest. He felt the cool air on her skin. "Move," she commanded. They moved in unison. It was a slow, Tai Chi-like dance. When she raised her arm, his arm raised, not because he consciously willed it, but because the impulse traveled from her brain to his nerves. They stepped closer, palms pressing together. The synchronization was intoxicating. Jace could feel the precise tension in her forearm, the shift of her weight. But he also felt something else, a current of emotion running beneath the physical data. He felt her fear, sharp and cold. He felt her determination hard as diamond, and as they pivoted, their bodies brushing against each other, he felt a sudden hot spike of attraction. It was intense, magnified by the link. He looked at her, and she was looking at him, her violet eyes wide. The line between his desire and hers vanished. He didn't know if the heat rising in his chest was his or hers, or a feedback loop creating a storm between them. Jace's breath hitched. He stepped into her space, his hand sliding up to her shoulder, guided by the overlay but fueled by something else. Lyra's bioluminescent markings flared brilliant white, a physical betrayal of her arousal. She gasped and ripped the node from her neck. The connection severed instantly. Jace stumbled forward, the loss of her presence in his mind leaving him dizzy and cold. "That is enough," Lyra snapped, turning away. Her back was to him, but he could see the light on her skin pulsing erratically. "Lyra, Jace started. "Humans have distracting biosignals," she interrupted, her voice shaking. "It interferes with the combat algorithms. We will rely on traditional instruction from now on." She stormed out of the dojo, leaving Jace standing alone in the silence, his skin still tingling where the ghost of her touch lingered. 2 days later, the Ethelgard dropped out of warp on the edge of the Heliox system. The shipyard was a monstrous structure, a skeletal lattice of metal wrapping around a small, harvested moon. Thousands of ships hung in the void, from massive freighters to half-built destroyers. The AI masked the Ethelgard's signature, broadcasting a fake transponder code that identified them as a luxury pleasure cruiser registered to a corporate vice president. "Remember the cover," Lyra said as they stood in the airlock. She was adjusting the collar of Jace's suit, a high-end civilian cut that made him look like a wealthy tourist trying too hard to look rugged. "I am Elias Vane, private contractor," Jace recited. "You are my wife, Kaya. We are here for the Platinum Tier Couples Tour of the Drive Yards because I am a starship enthusiast and you are a supportive, if bored, spouse." "Exactly," Lyra said. "The tour gives us access to the upper gantries. From there, we can access the maintenance shafts." She looked him in the eye. "And Jace, we have to sell it. The security scanners look for micro-expressions of deception. If we look like we are acting, we are dead." "I can be affectionate," Jace said, offering a lopsided grin. "I am very lovable." Lyra rolled her eyes, but she took his hand. Her fingers were cool, interlacing with his. "Do not get used to it," she muttered. The tour was an exercise in absurdity. They were herded along with 5 other wealthy couples by a drone guide that droned on about thrust ratios and cargo displacements. Jace played the part of the enthusiastic nerd perfectly, asking annoying questions about fuel efficiency, while Lyra played the trophy wife, nodding politely and checking her nails. But the act forced proximity. They had to stand close when the group crowded into a viewing blister to look at a dreadnought engine. Jace wrapped his arm around Lyra's waist. She didn't flinch. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "For the scanners," she whispered against his neck. "Right," Jace whispered back. "For the scanners." But the warmth of her body against his wasn't acting. The smell of her ozone and spices filled his head. They reached the glass elevator that ascended the central spire of the shipyard. It was a long ride, offering a panoramic view of the forest of warships being assembled. The scale of it was terrifying. This was an invasion fleet in the making. The drone guide was at the other end of the car. Jace turned Lyra toward the glass, ostensibly to point out a welding rig. "Look at that, darling," Jace said, pointing. "Variable geometry thrusters." Lyra looked at him. The reflection of the warships ghosted over her face. "It is beautiful," she said. But she wasn't looking at the ships. She was looking at him. In the reflection of the glass, they looked like any other couple, a man and a woman standing against the void. "You are doing well," she whispered. "You make it easy," Jace murmured. He brushed a stray lock of hair from her forehead. His thumb lingered on her cheekbone. Her skin shimmered under his touch, a soft violet bloom. "Is that for the cameras?" Jace asked, his voice barely audible. Lyra's eyes searched his. "I do not know anymore." The elevator chimed. The moment shattered. "This is our stop," Lyra said, her voice snapping back to professional steel. They slipped away from the group near the cooling towers, Jace jamming a door lock with a sonic pulse from his watch. They were in the maintenance bay now, a labyrinth of pipes, steam, and roaring machinery. Jace moved quickly, shedding the persona of the wealthy tourist. He was the mechanic again. He located the primary data trunk, a massive bundle of fiber optics running along the wall. "Keep watch," Jace said, pulling a data pad from his jacket. He jacked into the port. His fingers flew across the screen. Code cascaded down the display. "I am in," Jace muttered. "Bypass is holding, injecting the tracker. Now." A siren wailed. The sound was deafening, a klaxon that vibrated in their teeth. The maintenance bay lights turned from white to a flashing, emergency crimson. Anomalous intrusion detected. A synthesized voice boomed, "Sector 4, seal the bulkheads." "They found us," Lyra said, drawing a slender energy pistol from beneath her coat. "Jace, how long?" "Done!" Jace yelled, ripping the cord free. "Run!" They bolted. The maintenance bay became an obstacle course. Drones dropped from the ceiling, their stunning lasers tracking movement. Lyra fired, her shots precise, blasting the sensors off the machines. Jace vaulted over a steam pipe, sliding under a closing blast door. They reached the exterior gantry, a narrow walkway suspended over the open vacuum of the shipyard's central shaft. There was no artificial gravity here. Only their mag boots kept them anchored. "The Ethel Guard is signaled," Lyra shouted over the comms. "She is coming to the secondary airlock." Security forces, armored humans with heavy rifles, poured onto the gantry behind them. Plasma bolts sizzled past Jace's ear, melting the railing. "Jump!" Lyra ordered. She pointed to a lower platform, 30 meters down. In 0G, it was just a push. They leaped. They floated through the vast industrial cathedral, rotating slowly. It was terrifying and exhilarating. They landed hard on the lower platform, boots locking with a metallic clang, but the impact shook the rusted structure. The docking arm Jace was holding onto groaned, metal sheared. "Jace!" Lyra screamed. The section of the walkway Jace was standing on broke free. He was flung outward, away from the station, spinning into the open void. His mag boots had nothing to lock onto. He was drifting, fast, toward the exhaust wake of a freighter. Jace scrambled for his tether, but his fingers were numb. He watched the station receding. He saw Lyra standing on the edge, screaming his name, her voice tearing through the comms. This is it, Jace thought. This is the glamorous space life. Then, a shadow eclipsed the stars. The Ethelgard roared out of the darkness, abandoning all stealth. The ship did not use a tractor beam. It opened a port, and a tendril of living metal, thick as a tree trunk, shot out. It moved with the speed of a striking snake. The tendril wrapped around Jace's waist. It was firm but yielding, like a giant hand. "Got you," the AI's voice said in his ear. "Try not to vomit." Jace was yanked back, accelerating toward the ship. The airlock cycled open, and he was deposited onto the deck plates with a wet thud. Lyra was there before he could stand. She had jumped the gap from the station to the ship's ramp as it swept past. She fell to her knees, grabbing the front of his jacket, hauling him up. Her face was pale, her markings flashing a frantic, erratic white. "You idiot," she choked out. "You absolute idiot." "I am okay," Jace wheezed, trying to sit up. "Just a little drift." She did not let him finish. She pulled him into her chest, burying her face in his neck. She was trembling violently. "I can't lose you again," she whispered. "I can't." Jace froze. His arms came up, wrapping around her, holding her tight. He could feel her heart hammering against his. It wasn't the neural link this time, it was real. He pulled back slightly, looking at her. Her eyes were wet with tears. "You are way too invested in your mechanic, princess," he said weakly, trying to find a joke to hide the fact that his own hands were shaking. She did not laugh. She pressed her forehead against his. Their breaths mingled, rapid and shallow. The adrenaline of the chase was crashing into something else, relief, fear, and a raw, undeniable need. "Jace," she breathed. She tilted her head. He leaned in. The world narrowed down to the space between their lips. Hormonal spikes detected. The AI's voice boomed through the corridor, loud enough to wake the dead. "Proximity alert. You are currently obstructing the decontamination nozzle. Please separate for sanitation." They sprang apart as if electrocuted. Lyra smoothed her hair, her face burning a deep violet. Jace scrambled to his feet, pretending to check his boots. "Right," Jace said, his voice cracking. "Sanitation. Important. I will be on the bridge," Lyra said, not looking at him. "We need to jump to hyperspace." She turned and marched away, her footsteps echoing too loudly. Jace watched her go, his heart still racing, unsure if he wanted to strangle the AI or thank it. Millions of miles away, in the obsidian boardroom of the Heliox Dominion headquarters, a group of executives watched a screen fill with static. "We have lost the shipyard feed," a technician reported. "Someone planted a logic bomb in the manufacturing queue. The data is corrupted." The CEO, a man whose face was more cybernetic chrome than flesh, turned to a shadowed figure projected on a monitor at the end of the table. "Your stray asset has teeth, counselor," the CEO said smoothly. "And she has help." The figure in the shadows shifted. A hand, long-fingered and elegant, a Tethai hand, rested on the table. "Let them come," the counselor whispered. He tapped a command into his console. "Send the message to the fleet. The emissary and her human pet are headed our way. It is time for a family reunion. Tethys Prime did not look like a planet that could harbor a conspiracy. It looked like a dream suspended in a drop of water. The Ethelgard descended through the upper atmosphere, piercing a veil of auroras that shimmered like curtains of green and violet fire. Below them, the ocean stretched out endlessly, a global expanse of deep, bioluminescent indigo that pulsed with the rhythmic breathing of the tides. There were no continents here, only vast floating archipelagos grown from living crystal. Jace stood on the bridge, his hands pressed against the transparent aluminum of the viewport. He had seen space stations, asteroid belts, and gas giants, but he had never seen a world that looked so fragile and so ancient simultaneously. The city of Othila rose from the waves like a cluster of jagged diamonds. Towers of translucent white coral spiraled upward, connected by gravity-warping bridges that hummed with soft blue light. Massive creatures, sky whales with translucent fins trailing distinct vapors, drifted between the spires, their mournful songs vibrating against the ship's hull. "It is beautiful," Jace said, his voice dropping to a hush. "And it looks expensive. I am afraid to touch anything in case I break a national treasure." "It is grown, not built," Lyra corrected, though her eyes were fixed on the landing platform approaching rapidly. "Every tower is a living organism. The bridges are neural pathways. The city remembers everything. Jace, it remembers who walked here 1,000 years ago." She smoothed the front of her diplomatic robe. She had shed the practical bodysuit for something far more ceremonial, a gown of heavy woven light that trailed behind her like a comet's tail. It was regal, imposing, and, Jace suspected, incredibly heavy. "And it remembers who left," she added softly. The landing platform was a disk of polished pearl floating 100 feet above the water. As the yacht touched down, the ramp extended with a fluid grace. A delegation was waiting. There were no cheering crowds. There were no banners. Just a line of 12 figures standing in perfect stillness. They wore high collars of stiffened coral and robes that absorbed the light rather than reflected it. "The Council of 12, Lyra murmured. "They look thrilled." Jace adjusted the cuffs of his suit. He felt underdressed, even in the expensive clothes she had fabricated for him. "They look like they are about to sentence us to death by boredom," Jace whispered. "Do I bow, shake hands, offer a wrench as a peace offering?" "Do nothing," Lyra commanded. "Stand behind me. Look dangerous but silent. And for the love of the stars, do not make a joke about the smell. It smells like sulfur and brine because of the algae bloom. It is sacred." "I love the smell of sacred sulfur in the morning," Jace muttered, falling into step behind her. The delegation was led by Elder Vok, a Tethai with skin the color of dried parchment and eyes that held zero warmth. He stepped forward as Lyra disembarked, his hands clasped inside his sleeves. "Emissary Lyra," Vok said. His voice was like grinding stones. "You return." "Elder Vok," Lyra replied, inclining her head exactly 1 inch. "I return with a completed portfolio and new assets for the compact." Vok's gaze slid past her and landed on Jace. The elder's nostrils flared slightly. "And this," Vok said, gesturing with a single dismissive finger. "Is this the asset? A human mechanic?" Jace felt the urge to salute, but he held his ground. "This is Jace," Lyra said, her voice sharpening. "He is a specialist in non-standard engineering and security protocols. He is my consultant." "Consultant," Vok repeated, tasting the word as if it were spoiled meat. "We were informed you had hired a pet, Lyra. We did not realize you intended to bring it into the sacred precincts." Jace stepped forward before he could stop himself. "Actually, the term is independent contractor. Jace said, flashing a grin that was all teeth. And I am fully house-trained. I only bite when people threaten my employer. A ripple of shock went through the delegation. Elder Vox stiffened. Lyra did not look at Jace, but he saw the corner of her mouth twitch, a microscopic battle between a smile and diplomatic terror. We have scheduled a gratitude hearing for tomorrow, Vox said, ignoring Jace completely now. You will explain your off-world investments. You will justify why Tethai credits are flowing into human manufacturing sectors. There are accusations. Lyra, people say you are selling our culture to the highest bidder. I am saving our culture from stagnation, Lyra countered. We shall see, Vox said. He turned and walked away, the delegation following him like a school of synchronized fish. As the doors to the transport tube closed, shutting out the humid air, Lyra let out a breath she seemed to have been holding since they entered orbit. She leaned back against the cool crystal wall of the pod. You just insulted the High Elder, she said, though there was no heat in her voice. I clarified my job description, Jace said. And honestly, he started it. Pet, that is just rude. Lyra looked at him, and for the first time since they landed, the regal mask slipped. She looked tired. They are afraid. Jace, Helioc's lobbyists have been here for months. They have been whispering in the council's ears, telling them that I am dangerous, that I am corrupted by human influence. Tomorrow is not a hearing, it is a trial. That night, Lyra's personal quarters were a sanctuary of silence amidst the political noise. The room was located in one of the highest spires, with a balcony that overlooked the glowing ocean. The walls were lined with memory crystals, small glowing orbs that held holographic records. Jace stood by the balcony doors, watching the sky whales breach the surface of the water far below, creating cascades of neon foam. He turned when he heard Lyra enter. She had changed into a simple tunic of shifting gray silk. The heavy ceremonial armor was gone, and with it, the armor of her personality. She walked over to a small console and activated a series of holograms. Images floated into the air. Grainy, three-dimensional snapshots of a life interrupted. This was me at 7 cycles, Lyra said, pointing to a shimmering image of a small, gangly alien child trying to glide off a crystal ridge. I broke my arm 3 seconds after this was taken. Jace smiled, stepping closer. You look fierce. Even then. I was arrogant, she said softly. She swiped her hand, and another image appeared. 2 girls this time. Lyra, slightly older, and another Tethai girl with softer features and markings that spiraled in gentle loops. My sister, Kale, Lyra said. Her voice caught on the name. She died in the first year of my exile. A sickness, the official report said. But Kale was never sick. She looked at Jace, the violet light of the hologram reflecting in her eyes. I was not just a refugee. Jace, I was a candidate for air speaker. It is a semi-royal position, the voice of the planet. I was next in line. Jace felt a jolt of surprise, though it made sense. The way she carried herself, the way she commanded the room, it was bred in the bone. What happened? Jace asked. I found the first records of the Heliox deal, she said. I went to my mentor, the one person I thought I could trust. He told me he would handle it. That night, the security drones came for me. My exile was not an accident, Jace. It was a scripted assassination that I survived by pure luck. She turned away from the images, staring out at the ocean. I screamed at you that day in the station, she whispered. I told you I did not need you. I was so proud. I thought admitting I needed help was the same as admitting I was weak. Jace moved to stand beside her. He didn't touch her, not yet. but he was close enough to feel the warmth of her skin. That pride kept you alive, Jace said gently, but it also kept you lonely. He paused, watching her profile. You screamed you did not need me, but someone was counting on that. Lyra, they were counting on your pride to keep you isolated, to keep you from asking for help. Because a lonely target is an easy target. Lyra turned to him slowly. The truth of his words seemed to strike her physically. Her eyes shimmered, tears forming on the lower lids, trembling there like liquid diamonds. She blinked, and they vanished, absorbed by her resolve, but the vulnerability remained. I am tired of being lonely, she confessed, her voice barely a breath. Jace reached out. His hand hovered over hers on the console. You are not alone, he said. Not anymore. Their fingers brushed. It wasn't just skin touching skin, it was electricity. The neural implants they both wore, calibrated to the ship and to each other, hummed in resonance. Jace felt a sudden warmth flood his chest that had nothing to do with his own circulatory system. He felt a profound sense of relief, a release of tension he hadn't known she was carrying. Lyra did not pull away. She turned her hand over, interlacing her fingers with his. Her bioluminescent markings, usually a steady violet, began to bloom. Soft patterns of azure and rose unfurled down her neck, tracing the lines of her collarbone. It was a physical language of trust he was only beginning to understand. I wondered about you, Jace said, his voice rough. For 10 years. Every time I saw a ship dock, I looked for you. I told myself it was just curiosity. I told myself I just wanted to know if the kid made it. He stepped closer, invading her personal space, and she stepped in to meet him. I was lying to myself, Jace whispered. Lyra looked up at him. Her markings were pulsing faster now, matching the erratic rhythm of his own heart. The neural link amplified it all, the hesitation, the longing, the fear. It was a feedback loop of desire that made his head spin. Show me, she whispered. She guided his free hand to her neck, placing his palm against the glowing lines of her throat. This is where we feel the truth, she said. Her skin was impossibly soft, vibrating with a low hum of energy. Jace could feel her pulse beating against his fingertips. He leaned down. She tilted her head back. The kiss was slow. It was hesitant, a question asked in the silence of the room. Are we doing this? Are we crossing this line? Then, she hummed, a soft, resonant sound in her throat, and the hesitation shattered. Lyra pressed herself against him, her hands tangling in his hair. Jace wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her flush against him. The years of buried longing, the memory of that starving girl and the mechanic who saved her, the tension of the chase, it all erupted. The neural link flared. Jace gasped against her mouth as a wave of sensation hit him. He didn't just feel the kiss, he felt her feeling the kiss. He felt the rush of endorphins in her brain, the dizzying height of her need. It was overwhelming, a merging of emotion and sensation that blurred the boundaries of where he ended and she began. Lyra broke the kiss for a second, her forehead resting against his, her eyes wide and dark. I can feel you, she whispered, her voice trembling. You are so loud. Jace, your heart is thunder. I can't help it, he murmured, his hands trembling where they rested on her waist. You are terrifying, and you are everything. She guided his hand down, tracing the bioluminescent lines that ran beneath the fabric of her tunic. Do not be afraid, she said. I need this. I need you to know me. They fell back onto the low cushions of the lounge. The holographic stars above them swirled, mixing with the glow of Lyra's skin, the boundaries of species, of rank, of employer and employee dissolved. There was only the heat of their bodies and the terrifying, beautiful synchronization of their minds. In the dark, amidst the tangle of limbs and the soft, glowing light, the admission came. It wasn't a shout this time. It was a whisper, shared between broken breaths. I need you. Later. The silence of the room was comfortable, heavy with the scent of ozone and the sea. They lay tangled together beneath a blanket of shifting light. Jace stared up at the ceiling, one arm draped over his eyes. We are terrible at following mission protocols, he said. Lyra laughed, a rich, throaty sound that vibrated against his ribs. She was resting her head on his chest, tracing imaginary patterns on his skin with a glowing fingertip. I believe the handbook says, establish close working relationship with local assets, she teased. I would say we are very compliant, Jace chuckled, shifting to look at her. You are going to get me fired, or executed, or both. Worth it, Lyra murmured, her smile fading into a look of fierce protectiveness. She kissed his chest, right over his heart. I will not let them touch you. Jace, tomorrow, we end this. We expose the ledger, we shame the council, and then we figure out what this is. Whatever this is, Jace said, kissing the top of her head. I am in. The morning sun on Tethys Prime was a harsh, brilliant white that made the crystal towers gleam like blades. The gratitude hearing was held in the Hall of Tides, a massive amphitheater open to the sky, with seating for 5,000 citizens. The seats were full. The air buzzed with the sound of whispered conversations and the hum of recording drones. Lyra stood on the central dais. Jace a few steps behind her. She wore her diplomatic armor again, but Jace knew what lay beneath it now. He caught her eye as the council filed in, and he gave her a small, steadying nod. Elder Vok took the podium. He did not look like a judge today. He looked like an executioner. Citizens of Tethys, Vok boomed, his voice amplified by the acoustics of the Crystal Hall. We gather to hear the report of our emissary. But first, we must address a grave concern regarding the security of our world. Lyra stepped forward. Elder Vok, the portfolio is ready for review. Vok held up a hand. The portfolio is irrelevant if the carrier is compromised. He gestured to the side of the arena. A holographic screen ignited, massive and undeniable. Helioc's lobbyists stood in the front row, smiling thinly. On the screen, a stream of data appeared. It was Jace's personnel file, but it was wrong. It showed transfers of military-grade encryption keys from Lyra's accounts to a known human mercenary group. It showed Jace meeting with Helioc's agents in the Outer Rim, meetings that never happened. We have evidence, Vok declared, that this human is not a mechanic. He is a saboteur, a spy planted by military factions to destabilize our treaty with Helioc's. And you, Lyra, have been funneling our secrets to him. Gasps filled the chamber. The sound was like a physical blow. That is a lie, Lyra shouted, her voice ringing clear. These records are forged, are they? Vok asked smoothly. Or are you simply blinded? He leaned over the podium, his voice dropping to a mock-sympathetic purr that carried to every corner of the hall. We have all heard the rumors. Emissary, we know that you allow this human into your private quarters. We know that you have let human temptation cloud your judgment. Jace felt the blood drain from his face, replaced instantly by a rush of hot, violent rage. He took a step forward, his hands balling into fists. You watch your mouth, Jace growled, his voice low and dangerous. Vok smiled. See? The beast bares its teeth. Is it true? Lyra? Vok asked, addressing the crowd now. Are you sacrificing the safety of your people for the affections of a human pet? Have you fallen so low that you would trade our future for a warm bed? The crowd murmured, the sound turning ugly. Traitor, collaborator, lover of aliens. Lyra stood frozen. Her face was burning, her bioluminescent markings flashing in a chaotic, distressed strobe. She looked at the crowd, then at the Heliox agents, then at Vok. She saw the trap closing. If she defended Jace now, she confirmed the rumors. She lost all credibility. The ledger, the conspiracy. No one would believe a word she said if they thought she was just a love-struck fool manipulated by a human spy. She looked back at Jace. He was ready to fight. He was ready to tear the room apart for her. He looked at her with that open, desperate trust she had seen the night before, but fear, cold and sharp, pierced her heart. She was the air speaker. She had a duty. She had to save the mission. She turned back to Vok, her posture rigid. "This man is an employee," she said. Her voice was ice. It was the voice of the queen she was trained to be. "He is a tool," she continued, her voice rising. "A paid consultant, nothing more." Jace froze. The words hit him harder than a physical blow. "A tool." "If he is compromised," Lyra said, forcing the words through a throat that felt like it was filled with glass. "Then he is a liability. I did not bring him here to compromise our security. I brought him because he was useful." She refused to look at Jace. She stared straight at Vok. "If the council demands it, I will terminate his contract immediately. I do not let personal feelings interfere with my duty. I do not need him." The echo hung in the air. "I do not need him." It was the same shout from the station 10 years ago, but this time, it wasn't a desperate girl protecting her pride. It was a powerful woman sacrificing him to save herself. Jace stood there, the silence ringing in his ears. He felt the neural implant buzz, a sharp, discordant feedback of her panic and his own shattering heart, and he severed the connection manually. He tapped the command on his wrist, and the warmth of her presence in his mind vanished, leaving him cold and hollow. "Understood." "Emissary," Jace said. His voice was dead. He looked at her back. She was trembling, but she did not turn. "I guess I know my place now," he said quietly. He turned to the crowd, to Vok, to the smiling Heliox agents. "You want me gone? Fine. I am gone." Jace turned and stormed out of the Hall of Tides. He walked past the jeering crowds, past the guards. He walked with a mechanic's stride, purposeful and hard, but his eyes were burning. He wasn't angry. He was destroyed. He had let himself believe for one night that he mattered, that he was more than just the help. He tapped his comms. "Ship," Jace said. "Prep the escape pod." "Jace," the AI replied, its voice unusually subdued. "My sensors indicate elevated stress levels in both you and the emissary. I advise against separation." "Prep the damn pod," Jace snapped. "I am leaving. I am getting the proof of the conspiracy, and then I am getting off this rock, on the dais." Lyra watched him go. She watched his figure disappear through the archway, silhouetted against the blinding white sun. Her hands were shaking so hard she had to grip the railing of the podium to steady herself. She had won the moment. The crowd was quieting, waiting for her next word. She had saved her political standing, but as she watched the empty archway, the victory tasted like ash. She felt the severance of the neural link like a phantom limb being amputated. She had done it again. She had pushed away the only person who had ever truly seen her. She had saved her position. But as the applause began to ripple through the confused crowd, Lyra knew with a terrifying certainty that she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Jace worked with the cold, mechanical precision of a machine that had been stripped of its safety protocols. He had set up a temporary workspace in the cargo hold of a decommissioned atmospheric skiff he had rented. Stolen, really? But the paperwork was pending, on the fringes of the lower city. The air here smelled of brine and engine coolant, a comforting scent that reminded him of the rust bucket station he had left behind. 3 holographic screens floated before him, projecting cascades of intercepted shipping manifests. He was not looking for overt weapon shipments anymore. That was too clumsy for a corporation like Heliox. He was looking for energy. "You are ghosting the power grid," the datapad's primitive AI whispered. Its voice was tinny, nothing like the sophisticated dryness of Lyra's ship. "Unauthorized access is a felony punishable by—" "Mute," Jace snapped. The audio cut out, leaving only the hum of the cooling fans. Jace swiped through the data. He was tracing the energy consumption of Othela's industrial sectors. The crystal cities of Tethys Prime were powered by geothermal vents deep in the ocean crust. A clean, limitless source. But the numbers did not add up. There, he froze the stream, expanding a sector of the southern oceanic shelf. According to the official logs, this sector was a protected marine sanctuary. 0 industrial activity, 0 habitation. Yet, the thermal siphon readings showed a massive, localized draw of power. It was pulling enough gigawatts to power a fleet of dreadnoughts, or to run a genetic sequencing farm the size of a city block. "Hidden laboratories," Jace muttered, his eyes reflecting the blue data light. "Beneath the surface, siphoning planetary energy to fuel the very thing that will enslave them." He leaned back, rubbing his face with hands that were stained with grease and shaking slightly. He had the proof. He had the location. He could send this to the Resistance, broadcast it on a tight beam to the neighboring systems, and then get on a transport ship and vanish. He could be gone by morning. He looked at the empty seat beside him. For a split second, he expected to see Lyra there, looking over his shoulder, her violet eyes wide with that mix of intelligence and terror that he had come to. To what? Jace asked the empty room. To tolerate? To serve? To love? The thought hit him like a wrench to the gut. He shoved it down, burying it under layers of anger. She had called him a tool. She had stood on that dais, draped in her royal light, and reduced him to a hammer she could pick up and discard at will. "I am just the help," he reminded himself, grabbing his jacket. And the help is clocking out, high above, in the crystalline spires of the council chambers. Lyra was learning the true cost of safety. The room was circular, walls grown from white coral that dampened sound. Elder Vox sat opposite her, flanked by 2 other senior counselors. A Heliox representative, a human woman with a smile like a razor blade, sat silently at the end of the table. "We have a proposal," Vox said, sliding a data slate across the polished table. "A compromise, emissary, to put this unpleasantness behind us." Lyra looked at the slate. It was a treaty, a binding agreement of mutual cooperation between the Tethai Council and the Heliox Dominion. "In exchange for the immediate deployment of Heliox peacekeeper fleets to our borders," Vox continued, his voice smooth as oil, "you will publicly denounce the human mercenary. Jace, you will testify that he manipulated you, that he stole state secrets, and that you have severed all ties." Lyra read the fine print. The peacekeeper fleets would have jurisdiction over Tethys Prime's orbital defenses. The cooperation included mandatory genetic sampling of all citizens for medical archives. "It is a gilded cage," Lyra whispered. "You are not asking for protection. You are asking for an occupation. We are asking for survival," Vox snapped, his patience fraying. "The galaxy is dangerous. Lyra, We are a resource-rich planet with no standing army. We need a patron. Heliox offers stability. Stability, Lyra repeated, at the cost of our sovereignty, at the cost of our blood. And what is the alternative? Vok asked, leaning forward, relying on the affection of a rogue mechanic? You made the right choice in the Hall of Tides. Lyra, you chose your people over your pet. Do not undo that wisdom now. Sign the treaty, the Heliox woman added, speaking for the first time. Her voice was devoid of inflection. And the human will be allowed to leave the system unharmed. Refuse, and he will be classified as a hostile combatant. We cannot guarantee his safety if he is an enemy of the state. Lyra looked at them. She looked at the sterile white walls that felt like the interior of a tomb. She realized then that she had been playing a game she could never win. She had sacrificed Jace to keep her seat at the table. But the table was already owned by the enemy. I need time, Lyra said, standing up. Her legs felt weak, but her voice was steady. To review the terms. You have until dawn, Vok said. Do not disappoint us again, emissary. Lyra walked out of the chamber with her head high. She walked past her personal guards, past the bowing functionaries. She entered her private lift and keyed in the destination, but she did not go to her quarters. As the lift descended, she stripped off the heavy ceremonial collar and threw it on the floor. She tore the intricate jewelry from her hair, letting the dark locks fall free. She ripped the silk of her skirt to allow for movement. She overridden the lift's safety protocols, forcing it past the residential spires down into the depths of the city, down to the roots. She was not going to sign, and she was not going to let them touch Jace. The lower levels of Othela were a chaotic, neon-drenched nightmare that Lyra had only ever seen in intelligence reports. Here, the crystal architecture was overgrown with bioluminescent moss and patched with rusted metal. The air was thick with steam and the smell of frying spices. It was a marketplace of the desperate. Smugglers hawked illicit tech from the shadows. Street performers juggled balls of plasma. Bioengineered pets, some cute, some terrifying, scurried underfoot. Lyra pulled her hood low, hiding her glowing markings. She moved through the crowd, feeling the pulse of the city, not the polite, sanitized rhythm of the upper spires, but a frantic, beating heart of survival. She checked the tracker on her wrist. She had kept the frequency of Jace's neural implant, even after he blocked the link. It was a faint signal, bouncing off the damp walls. She turned a corner and nearly collided with a vendor selling bubbling jars of slime. Watch it. Highborn, the vendor hissed, a crustacean-like creature with too many eyes. Lyra ignored him, pushing through the throngs. She found the signal getting stronger near a cluster of dive bars built into the hollowed-out shell of a dead sea beast. Outside one of the bars, she heard a familiar voice. Look, buddy. I do not care if it makes me glow in the dark or sing like a soprano, Jace was saying. I am not buying your algae. Lyra stopped, peering around a rusted pillar. Jace was standing by a stall, looking haggard. His jacket was torn. His eyes were rimmed with red, but his posture was that distinctive mix of arrogance and exhaustion. A vendor with waving tentacles was thrusting a jar of green sludge in his face. It is guaranteed, the vendor insisted, slapping a tentacle on the counter. Aphrodisiac algae, harvested from the deep trenches. 1 spoon and you will have the vigor of a bull shark. I am trying to spawn a headache, not a colony, Jace retorted, pushing the jar away. Besides, I am swearing off relationships. They are too expensive. The last one cost me my dignity and a very nice toolkit. The vendor leaned in. For a broken heart. I have a hallucinogenic moss. It makes you forget your name. Does it make me forget hers? Jace asked, his voice dropping to a whisper that cut Lyra to the bone. The vendor paused. That costs extra. Lyra stepped out of the shadows. Jace, she said. He froze. He didn't turn around immediately. She saw his shoulders tense, the muscles bunching under his jacket. He took a slow breath, then turned. When he saw her, the mask of humor vanished. His face was a mask of cold, hard stone. You are a long way from the palace, emissary, Jace said. Did you come to fire me again? Or did you just run out of people to insult? I came to warn you, Lyra said, stepping closer. The crowd parted around them, sensing the tension. They are going to kill you, Jace. If I do not sign their treaty, they will mark you as a hostile combatant. Jace laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Let them try. I have been threatened by better corporate goons than these. He turned back to the vendor. Give me the moss. The strong stuff. Jace, please, Lyra pleaded, reaching for his arm. He ripped his arm away before she could make contact. Do not touch me, he snapped. You made it very clear where we stand. I am the tool. You are the queen. Tools do not get to have feelings, and queens do not get to come down to the gutter and pretend they care. I had to, Lyra cried, her voice cracking. They were going to arrest you. I did it to save you. You did it to save yourself, Jace yelled back. The raw hurt in his voice silenced the nearby market stalls. You were ashamed of me. You were ashamed that you needed the help of a human mechanic. You looked at me and you saw a liability. I saw the only thing that mattered, Lyra shouted, tears spilling over. And I was terrified I would lose it. Jace stared at her, his chest heaving. The anger was still there, but beneath it, the confusion was breaking through. You have a funny way of showing it, he muttered. Before Lyra could answer, the world exploded. The storefront of the bar behind Jace disintegrated in a flash of plasma fire. The concussive force threw them both backward. Jace hit the pavement hard, rolling instinctively. Debris rained down, shards of metal, glass, and burning moss. Screams erupted from the market. The crowd stampeded. Through the smoke, 4 figures emerged. They were not council guards. They were Heliox liquidation squads, armored in matte black, faces obscured by combat helmets, moving with lethal precision. Target acquired. A mechanically amplified voice boomed, "Terminate." Jace was on his feet in a second. His mechanic's instinct overrode his heartbreak. "Move!" He roared, grabbing Lyra's hand. This time, he didn't pull away. They ran. They sprinted through the twisting alleyways of the lower level, dodging laser fire that sizzled against the damp walls. The assassins were fast, using jump jets to leap over obstacles. "Dead end!" Lyra shouted, skidding to a halt before a massive ventilation fan that blocked the path. Jace scanned the area. There were crates stacked against the wall. "Boost me!" he ordered. Lyra didn't hesitate. She laced her fingers together, forming a step. Jace launched himself off her hands, grabbing the lip of the overhead gantry. He swung up, pulled his laser cutter from his belt, and sliced the fan's power cable. The massive blades groaned to a halt. He reached down. Lyra jumped, grabbing his hand. He hauled her up just as a plasma grenade detonated where they had been standing. They scrambled through the fan blades into a maintenance tunnel. The assassins were right behind them. "We need to fight," Jace panted, pulling his energy pistol. "No, we cannot outrun them in these tunnels." Lyra drew her own weapon, a slender ceremonial blaster she had concealed in her boot. "Together," she said. They moved in perfect sync. It was like the training sessions on the ship, but faster, deadlier. Jace took the low ground, suppressing the attackers with rapid fire. while Lyra used the tunnel's pipes to swing above them, flanking their position. Jace ducked a vibro-blade swipe from the lead assassin and jammed his hydro-spanner into the servo joint of the man's armor. The armor seized up. Jace kicked him into the path of another attacker. Lyra dropped from the ceiling, landing on the second assassin's shoulders, driving her knee into his helmet sensors. "Two down," Jace yelled. The third assassin raised a heavy plasma cannon, aiming directly at Jace's exposed back. "Jace!" Lyra screamed. She didn't think. She didn't calculate. She threw herself across the gap, shoving Jace aside. The plasma bolt caught her in the side. The impact lifted her off her feet and slammed her against the tunnel wall. A cry of agony tore from her throat, cut short as she slid to the ground. "Lyra!" Jace screamed. He saw the blood. It wasn't red. It was a luminous, glowing violet liquid that spilled onto the dirty floor like spilled neon. The sight of it snapped something inside Jace. The fear vanished. The strategy vanished. All that was left was a cold, white-hot rage. He turned on the remaining assassin. He didn't fire his weapon. He holstered it. He charged. The assassin fired, but Jace moved with a speed born of pure desperation. He ducked the shot, tackled the man, and drove him into the wall with enough force to crack the concrete. Jace hammered his fists into the assassin's helmet again and again until the visor shattered and the man went limp. Jace didn't stop to check if he was dead. He scrambled back to Lyra. She was curled on her side, clutching her waist. The violet light of her blood was pooling around her, pulsing weakly. "Lyra." "Hey, look at me," Jace stammered, his hands hovering over the wound. His hands were slick with her glowing blood. It was warm. She opened her eyes. They were hazy, the bioluminescence in her irises dimming. "Did we win?" she whispered. "Yeah," Jace choked out, tearing a strip from his shirt to press against the wound. "Yeah, we won. You are going to be okay. I am going to fix this. I fix everything, remember?" He scooped her up in his arms. She felt impossibly light. "Hang on, princess," he whispered. "Just hang on." He ran. He carried her through the labyrinth of the Undercity, guided by a desperate memory of a resistant safe house he had spotted on the schematics. He found it, a hidden sea cave accessible only through a submerged drainage pipe. He waded through the waist-deep water, holding Lyra above the surface until they reached the dry cavern inside. The cave was lit by natural phosphorescent fungi on the ceiling, casting a ghostly green light. Jace laid her down on a pile of smuggling tarps. "Ship," Jace yelled into his comms. "I need a medical evac." "Now! I cannot land!" The AI's voice came back, crackling with static. "The orbital defense grid is locking onto my signature, but I am deploying a medical drone. It will arrive in 3 minutes. Keep pressure on the wound." "And Jace?" "What?" Jace snarled, pressing down on Lyra's side. She whimpered, her hand gripping his wrist. "Try not to let the emissary expire. It would be terrible for my insurance premiums." Jace let out a wet, shaky laugh. "I am working on it." The drone arrived, a small hovering sphere that scanned the injury and applied a biosealant foam. The bleeding stopped. The glowing violet pool on the floor began to dry. Lyra's breathing steadied. The color began to return to her skin, her markings flickering back to life. Jace sat back against the cave wall, exhausted, his hands still stained with her blood. He watched her. She shifted, groaning softly, and opened her eyes. She looked at him, at the blood on his hands, at the tear tracks cutting through the grime on his face. "You stayed," she whispered. "I am stupid that way," Jace said, his voice thick. Lyra reached out, her hand trembled in the air. Jace hesitated, then took it. Her grip was weak, but she refused to let go. I lied, she said, in the council chamber. I lied. I know, Jace said gently. No. You do not know the whole truth, Lyra said, struggling to sit up. Jace supported her, letting her lean against his chest. My mentor, the one who betrayed me 10 years ago. He taught me that a ruler must be an island. He told me that attachment is a weakness that enemies will exploit. When I was exiled, when I was starving on your station, I told myself he was right. I survived because I was alone. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. But I was wrong. I did not survive because I was alone. I survived because a human mechanic gave me a ration bar and erased a file. I survived because of you. She touched his cheek, her thumb brushing away a smudge of dirt. I was so afraid that if I admitted I needed you, I would become weak again. But today, when that bolt hit me, I was not afraid of dying. I was afraid of dying without telling you. Jace closed his eyes, leaning his face into her hand. I grew up on the docks, he said quietly. My parents died in a fuel leak when I was 6. Corporate negligence. They were just numbers on a spreadsheet, replaceable labor. I spent my whole life thinking that is all I was, a spare part, useful until I break. Then you throw me away. He opened his eyes. When you said that in the chamber, that I was a tool, it confirmed everything I ever thought about myself. I am sorry. Lyra wept, the tears glowing faintly as they fell. I am so sorry. Jace shook his head. Do not be. Because when I saw you get hit, I realized I don't care if I am a tool. I don't care if I am the help. As long as I am the one standing between you and the fire. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. I am not going anywhere. Lyra, you are stuck with me. Promise? She whispered. Contract signed in blood, Jace murmured, glancing at his stained hands. The sound of the waves echoing in the cave seemed to fade away. There was only the green light of the algae and the violet glow of Lyra's skin. The desperation of the fight, the terror of the near death, it all shifted into something else, something urgent and undeniable. Lyra pulled him closer. Her markings flared, a brilliant, blinding white that illuminated the cave. Stop talking, she breathed. She kissed him. It wasn't like the first kiss in her quarters. That had been tentative, exploring. This was rough. It was messy. It tasted of salt and fear and survival. Jace's hands tangled in her hair, pulling her deeper. Lyra's hands roamed over his chest, gripping his jacket as if to anchor herself to the earth. The neural link, which Jace had re-enabled without thinking, slammed open. He felt her pain from the wound, dull and throbbing, but buried under a tidal wave of desire. He felt her love. It was terrifyingly vast, a chaotic storm that centered entirely on him. And she felt his. She felt the fierce, protective adoration that he hid behind his sarcasm. They clung to each other in the dim light, shedding the armor of their pasts. The emissary and the mechanic ceased to exist. There was only Lyra and Jace, 2 survivors who had finally found home in the dark. And as the bioluminescence flared and the shadows lengthened, the cave became a private universe where the only law was their need for one another. Hours later, the cave was quiet. Jace sat near the entrance, checking the charge on his energy pistol. Lyra was adjusting the seals on a sleek, black stealth suit she had salvaged from a resistance cache hidden in the cave. She winced slightly as she zipped the suit over her bandaged side. You sure you are up for this? Jace asked, watching her with concern. We can wait. We cannot wait, Lyra said, her voice firm. Heliox knows we are alive. They will be hunting us. And if Vox signs that treaty at dawn, It is over. She picked up a second suit and tossed it to him. Put this on, and it will mask your thermal signature. Jace caught it. Black spandex. My favorite. Do I get a cape? Lyra smiled. It was a real smile this time. Unburdened by secrets. No cape. Just a rebreather and a very dangerous mission. She walked over to him. She took his hand, her fingers interlacing with his. The bond between them was settled now. It was no longer a frantic new thing. It was a steady hum in the back of their minds. A constant reassurance that the other was there. We infiltrate the underwater labs. Jace recited the plan. We tap the mainframe. We upload the data of the genetic harvesting and the warship power signatures to the global broadcast grid. And we expose them all. Lyra finished. Vok, the Council, Heliox. We show the planet what they have been doing in the dark. She looked toward the pool of water that led to the open ocean. It was pitch black, ominous and cold. Ready to dive? She asked. Jace squeezed her hand. After you, partner. They stepped into the water together. The cold hit them, but they didn't flinch. They pulled their rebreather masks on. The seals hissing shut. Hand in hand, they submerged. The water closed over their heads. The phosphorescent light of the cave faded, replaced by the crushing dark of the deep ocean. But they were not in total darkness. Lyra's markings began to glow, a soft, steady beacon in the abyss. Jace's suit lights flickered on. United, determined, and no longer alone. They swam down into the depths, heading toward the monsters that awaited them. The ocean was not silent. It was a cacophony of pressure groans, distant thermal venting, and the clicking language of crustaceans, all muffled by the crushing weight of the water. Jace and Lyra moved through the abyss like shadows detached from the night. Their stealth suits absorbed the active sonar pulses sweeping the perimeter of the Heliox facility. They were 2,000 feet down, where the water pressure was enough to crush a standard submarine like a soda can. Jace's voice crackled in Lyra's earpiece, tight with adrenaline but carrying that familiar, irritating, comforting edge of humor. So, if my suit implodes, Jace whispered, just know that I want my funeral to be open bar. No weeping, just expensive whiskey and someone lying about how tall I was. Focus. Jace, Lyra replied, though she couldn't suppress the small smile that tugged at her rebreather. Sensor net ahead. 3 o'clock. A grid of laser mines floated in the darkness, their red scanning beams cutting through the gloom. They were sensitive enough to detect the heartbeat of a fish. Lyra pointed to a massive, lumbering shape drifting toward them, a titan crab, a scavenger the size of a shuttle bus. Use the crab, she signaled. They kicked their fins, gliding into the slipstream of the giant creature. They pressed themselves against its barnacle-encrusted shell, letting its massive biosignature mask their own. The red lasers washed over the crab, ignoring the 2 parasites clinging to its underbelly. We are hitchhiking on a bottom feeder, Jace muttered. This is a new low for my career. It is tactical, Lyra corrected. And he is cute. He has your eyes. They peeled away as the crab passed the perimeter, drifting down toward the airlock of the hidden facility. It was a massive structure, anchored to the seabed, glowing with ominous yellow warning lights. The airlock control panel was behind a pressure shield. Jace floated up to it, pulling a hydro spanner from his belt. He worked quickly, his movements sluggish in the water but precise, hacking a localized pressure seal while holding my breath, Jace narrated softly. This is definitely voiding the warranty on my watch. The light on the panel turned green. The heavy doors groaned open. They slipped inside, the water draining away with a violent hiss as the pumps engaged. They stripped off their masks, gasping the stale, recycled air. Welcome to the heart of darkness, Jace said, checking his energy pistol. The facility was vast and sterile, a gleaming nightmare of chrome and glass. But it wasn't empty. It was filled with rows of stasis tanks, stretching as far as the eye could see. Jace and Lyra moved down the central corridor, their footsteps echoing. They stopped at the first tank. Jace recoiled that inside, suspended in amber fluid, was a Tathai, but it wasn't right. Its limbs were elongated, its muscle mass doubled, and cybernetic ports were grafted directly into its skull. Its eyes were open, vacant and milky. "What is this?" Jace whispered, horror coating his voice. "It is an army," Lyra said, her voice trembling. She moved to a console, her fingers flying across the holographic keys. Data streams flooded the air. "Project Chimera," she read. "Human Tethai hybrid enforcement units, genetically modified for obedience, increased aggression, and zero empathy. They are building a slave force to police my people." She swiped to the next file. Her breath hitched. "Origin samples." She read, "Subject 01. A DNA helix appeared on the screen. It was overlaid with a picture of a child, a Tethai child with violet eyes. "It is me," Lyra whispered. Jace moved to her side, reading the logs. Sample collected. Cycle 442. Subject shows unique adaptability markers. Recommended for long-term stress testing. Initiate exile protocol to monitor survival instincts in uncontrolled environments. Lyra backed away from the console, her hands shaking so hard she had to grip the edge of the desk. It was all a lie. She choked out, "My exile, the hunt. It wasn't because I found a ledger, it was a test. They wanted to see if their prototype could survive." She looked at her hands, at the glowing markings on her skin. "I am not a person, Jace. I am a product, my talent, my resilience. It is all manufactured. I am just a lab rat that escaped the maze." She sank to her knees, the weight of the revelation crushing her. The pride she had held onto, the belief that she had survived because of her own strength. It felt like ash in her mouth. Jace knelt beside her. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "Listen to me," he said, his voice hard and fierce. "Look at me, Lyra." She raised her tear-filled eyes. "I don't care what they made you in a test tube," Jace said. "I don't care if they engineered your DNA to be the perfect survivor. Because you know what they didn't engineer?" He tapped her chest, right over her heart. "They didn't engineer the girl who gave me a ration bar wrapper because she was too proud to say thank you. They didn't engineer the woman who came back for me in a tunnel full of assassins. They didn't engineer the way you laugh at my terrible jokes." He pulled her closer. "Your origins are just biology, Lyra. What you do with them, that is you. That is your choice. You are not their asset. You are the woman who is going to burn this place to the ground." Lyra took a shuddering breath. She looked at the data, then at Jace. The shaking stopped. The violet light in her eyes hardened into diamond. "You are right," she whispered. "I am not their asset. I am their reckoning." They moved deeper into the lab. They found the containment cells. Hundreds of prisoners were crammed into energy cages. Dissident scientists, political rivals, and humans who had refused to work on the project. Lyra stopped at a cell near the end of the block. An old Tethai man sat on the floor, his head in his hands. He looked gaunt. His once bright markings faded to a dull gray. "Mentor?" Lyra asked, her voice cold. The old man looked up. Recognition dawned, followed by a wave of shame so potent it seemed to age him 10 years in a second. "Lyra," he rasped, "you are alive." "Why?" she asked simply. He stood up, clutching the bars. They promised peace. Lyra, they said if we gave them the genetic rights, they would protect us from the raiders. I thought I could steer them. I thought I could control the conspiracy from the inside. By selling me? Lyra asked. By selling your own people into slavery, I had no choice, he cried. They threatened to burn the cities. You always have a choice, Lyra said. She raised her blaster. The energy hummed, high and lethal. Jace watched her. He didn't interfere. This was her ghost to exercise. The old man closed his eyes, accepting his fate. Lyra's finger tightened on the trigger. Her anger was a roaring fire, demanding blood for the 10 years of fear she had endured. But then she looked at the other prisoners watching her. She looked at Jace. If she pulled the trigger, she was just another executioner. She was just another part of the cycle of violence Heliox had built. She lowered the weapon. I am not you, she said, her voice ringing with authority. And I will not build my new world on a foundation of secret murders. She shot the control panel instead. The energy bars fizzled and died. Get up, she ordered. You are going to testify. You are going to tell the galaxy exactly what you did. That is your punishment, living with the truth. Jace let out a breath he had been holding. He nodded at her, a look of profound respect in his eyes. That is my emissary, he murmured. They reached the central control room. It was a suspended platform overlooking the reactor core, a swirling vortex of blue energy siphoned from the planet's crust. Jace jacked into the mainframe. I am uploading the data to the secure channel, Jace said, his fingers blurring. Genetic logs, the prisoner manifests, the warship blueprints. I am boosting the signal to hit every receiver in the system. A siren began to wail. Unauthorized transmission detected. The facility AI announced. Lockdown initiated. Reactor coolant purge engaged. The room shook. Steam began to hiss from the vents. What does that mean? Lyra asked, grabbing the edge of the console. It means they are superheating the ocean around the lab, Jace said, typing frantically. They are boiling us alive to protect their secrets. We have maybe 3 minutes before the structural integrity fails. The upload bar crawled. 40%, 50%. It is too slow, Jace muttered. The firewall is throttling the bandwidth. He looked at the escape pods on the schematic. Then he looked at the manual override station on the far side of the room, isolated behind a blast shield. Lyra, Jace said, his voice calm. You need to go. Take the prisoners. The escape sub is in Bay 4. What about you? Lyra asked, panic rising in her voice. I have to manually override the firewall from the isolation station. Jace lied. I will be right behind you. Lyra grabbed his arm. You are a terrible liar. Jace, if you go in there, the blast shield locks. You will be trapped when the reactor goes critical. Someone has to boost the signal, Jace said, or the upload fails. And this was all for nothing. No, Lyra screamed. I am not leaving you. Jace grabbed her face in his hands. Lyra, listen to me. This isn't about us anymore. This is about them. He gestured to the prisoners fleeing down the hall. They need you to lead them. The galaxy needs to see this data. If we both stay, we both die, and the truth dies with us. I don't care, Lyra sobbed, clinging to him. I don't care about the galaxy. I need you. Jace smiled. It was a sad, beautiful smile. I know, he whispered, and I need you to go. He kissed her hard, a desperate press of lips, and then he shoved her backward toward the door. He hit the lock panel. The blast door slammed shut between them. Jace! Lyra pounded on the glass. Open it! Open it now! Jace ignored her. He ran to the isolation station. He punched in the commands. Upload speed jumped. 80%, 90%. The room was getting hot. The metal was groaning. Lyra watched him through the glass. She was screaming his name, but the sound was muffled. Two freed prisoners, large, burly aliens, grabbed her arms, dragging her away as the corridor began to collapse. No! Jace! Inside the control room, Jace watched the progress bar hit 100%. Transmission complete. The AI announced. Jace slumped against the console. The heat was unbearable now. The reactor below was glowing a blinding white. He tapped his neural implant. He opened the channel one last time. "Hey, princess," he whispered. Lyra's voice came back, hysterical and broken. "Jace, please, please don't do this. You remember that girl?" Jace said, his voice raspy. "The one who shouted she didn't need anyone? I was lying," Lyra screamed. "I was lying." "I know," Jace said. "But that lie, it cost us 10 years. He closed his eyes. "I need you. Lyra, I always have. But I need the galaxy to see this more." The reactor began to destabilize. The neural link flared. For 1 second, time stopped. Jace pushed everything he had into the connection. Not words, not thoughts, but feelings. He sent her the memory of the first time he saw her in the market, the fierce, beautiful terror in her eyes. He sent her the taste of the gog root noodles. He sent her the feeling of her hand in his. He sent her the overwhelming, terrifying, absolute love he felt for her. And he felt her answer. It was a tidal wave of grief and gratitude and love so powerful it felt like it could restart a star. It was their entire relationship, lived in a single heartbeat. Then, the connection cut. The lab imploded. The ocean surface boiled. A massive geyser of steam and debris erupted into the twilight sky of Tethys Prime, a funeral pyre of water and fire. Lyra stood on the deck of the stolen Resistance submarine, watching the plume of destruction. She was screaming. It was a raw, animal sound of absolute loss. She fell to her knees, clutching her chest where the neural link had gone silent. It felt like a hole had been punched through her soul. "He is gone," she whispered. "He is gone." But high above, the screens of Othela flickered. Every holographic billboard, every data pad, every council monitor shifted. The face of the Heliox CEO appeared, speaking in hushed tones about genetic slavery. The records of the bribes appeared, the blueprints of the dreadnoughts. The truth washed over the planet. In the council square, a riot broke out instantly. Citizens tore down Heliox banners. Guards threw down their weapons, refusing to fire on their own people. The council tried to deny it. Elder Vox stood on the balcony, shouting about fabricated evidence. Then Lyra arrived. She stepped out of the transport, drenched in seawater, her hair matted, her eyes burning with a terrifying light. She walked through the crowd. They parted for her, silenced by the sheer force of her grief and rage. She climbed the steps to the broadcast square. She shoved Vox aside. "Look!" she commanded, her voice amplified across the entire city. "Look at what they did to us!" She pointed to the screens, to the image of the harvested DNA. "They stole our blood. They stole our children. And they did it with the help of the cowards standing behind me." The crowd roared. It was the sound of a revolution. Lyra looked at the camera. She spoke to the planet, but she was speaking to a ghost. "This truth cost a life," she said, her voice breaking. "It was bought with the blood of a human mechanic." She took a breath, steadying herself. "His name was Jace. He risked everything to free us. He saved me when I was a child, and he saved us all today." She looked up at the sky, at the stars where she had once hoped to travel with him. "I returned years later, rich, to thank him," she whispered, the title of her own tragedy hanging in the air. "And I will spend every credit, every ounce of power I have, to destroy the system that took him from me. Helioc's fleets warped in, weapons hot. They tried to land troops to secure the capital, but they were too late. The broadcast had reached the neighboring systems. Allied fleets, the Tethai Remnant, the Free Trade Coalition, even rogue human armadas jumped into the sector. They formed a blockade around Tethys Prime. "Stand down," the commander of the coalition fleet hailed. "Helioc's dominion. You are in violation of sentient rights. Withdraw or be fired upon." The corporation, facing a galaxy united by the horror of their crimes, blinked. They withdrew. The ceasefire was shaky, but it held. That evening, the fires of the riots had burned down to embers. The city was quiet, a heavy, mournful silence. Lyra stood on the balcony of the emissary's spire. She held a small, greasy object in her hand, a cheap metal necklace with a miniature wrench pendant. Jace had worn it under his suit. He had given it to her in the cave. For luck. She curled her fingers around it, the metal biting into her palm. She looked out at the city she had saved. It was free. The council was in chains. The future was open, but the world felt empty. It felt gray. "I don't want to live in a world you are not in," she whispered to the wind. She closed her eyes, listening for the dry, sarcastic voice of the ship's AI, for the laugh of a mechanic who made terrible jokes. But there was only silence, and the terrible, crushing weight of needing someone who was never coming back. The council chamber of Othala was no longer a place of hushed whispers and secret handshakes. It was a war room of reconstruction. For 5 days. Lyra had sat at the head of the obsidian table, her back rigid, her face a mask of terrifying calm. The Hall of Tides was gone, shattered by the riots, so they met here, in the high spire that scraped the edge of the atmosphere. The air was thin and cold, recycled through scrubbers that hissed rhythmically, a sound that grated on Lyra's raw nerves. Councillor Vok was gone, resigned in disgrace and currently under house arrest in his coastal estate. The remaining elders were a mix of the terrified and the opportunistic, scrambling to distance themselves from the Heliox scandal. "We must stabilize the currency," Elder Hanno said, his voice trembling as he gestured to a holographic chart. "The withdrawal of Heliox capital has caused a 30% drop in the exchange rate. We need to impose austerity measures immediately." "No austerity," Lyra said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like a laser. "We will not starve the lower levels to protect the investments of the upper spires. Liquidate the Heliox assets. Seize their infrastructure. We use their own money to rebuild what they broke. But the legality," Hanno sputtered. "The Galactic Trade Commission might—" "Let them sue me," Lyra snapped. She stood up, placing her hands flat on the table. Her bioluminescent markings were dim, a dull, aching gray that reflected her internal void. "I am done with half measures, Hanno. I am done with being polite while our world is sold for scrap. We reclaim everything. Today—" She turned to the window. The ocean below was calm, the scars of the reactor explosion hidden beneath the waves. Somewhere down there, amidst the crushed metal and the cooling vents, was the empty space where Jace had been. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the blast. She felt the phantom severance of the neural link, a silence in her head that was louder than any scream. She was functioning. She was leading. She was the emissary they needed, but she was hollowed out, a machine made of grief and duty. "Madam Emissary." A guard at the door announced, his voice uncertain. "We have an unscheduled arrival." Lyra didn't turn around. "Tell them to wait. I am in session. It is a priority override," the guard insisted. "The signal code is, well, it is old, madam, and the vessel is damaged." Lyra froze. A priority override. She spun around just as the massive doors hissed open. Floating into the chamber, hovering on anti-grav repulsors that whined in protest, was a sphere of scorched metal. It looked less like a ship and more like a tin can that had been chewed by a star beast. It was a standard-issue escape pod, but it had been welded together with scrap panels and held shut with industrial sealant. The pod drifted to the center of the room and landed with a heavy, ungraceful thud that cracked the polished floor. The counselors gasped, backing away. "What is the meaning of this?" Hanno demanded. "Security!" The pod door hissed. Sparks showered onto the carpet. The metal groaned, jammed. Then, with a solid, metallic kick from the inside, the door flew off its hinges and clattered across the room. Steam poured out. A figure emerged from the smoke. He was limping. His flight suit was shredded, revealing bandages wrapped around his ribs and left arm. His face was a map of bruises and his hair was singed on one side. He looked like he had gone 10 rounds with a supernova and lost. But the grin, that crooked, arrogant, beautiful grin, was intact. Behind him, a small holographic projector flickered to life, displaying the avatar of the Ethelguard's AI. "Delivery complete," the AI announced, its voice dripping with digital exhaustion. "I would like to file a formal complaint about the passenger. He refused to die despite my statistical models giving him a 0.01% chance of survival. It was very rude of him." Lyra stood frozen. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trying to escape a cage. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. "Jace?" she whispered. Jace wiped a smudge of soot from his forehead, wincing as he straightened up. "Hey, princess," he croaked. His voice was rough, damaged by smoke, but it was him. "Sorry I am late. The traffic in the afterlife was terrible." He didn't get to finish the joke. Lyra moved. She didn't walk. She didn't glide with diplomatic grace. She launched herself across the chamber. She was a blur of shimmering silk and desperate motion. She collided with him. Jace let out a sharp grunt of pain as her momentum hit his bruised ribs. But he didn't stumble. He caught her. His good arm wrapped around her waist, anchoring her to him, anchoring him to the earth. Lyra buried her face in his neck, inhaling the smell of burnt ozone, sweat, and cheap medical foam. It was the best smell in the universe. She was shaking, violent tremors that racked her entire body. "You are alive," she sobbed into his jacket. "You are alive." "Yeah," Jace whispered, burying his face in her hair. "I redirected the blast through the geothermal grid. Blew out every fuse within 50 miles, but it bought me 3 seconds to get to the pod." He pulled back slightly, looking down at her. His eyes were wet, betraying his casual tone. "Miss me?" he asked. Lyra didn't answer with words. She grabbed the lapels of his ruined jacket and pulled him down. She kissed him. It wasn't a private kiss. It wasn't a hidden moment in a sea cave. It was a declaration. She kissed him in the center of the council chamber, under the bright lights, in front of the elders, the guards, and the recording drones. She kissed him with all the fear and relief of the last 5 days pouring out of her. Her bioluminescent markings flared so bright they were blinding, casting the room in a wash of radiant violet light. The council chamber fell into a stunned, absolute silence. Elders stared with their mouths open. The idea of a Tethai, let alone the emissary, touching a human, touching a mechanic in such a way shattered centuries of protocol. It broke the unspoken laws of species separation. It cracked the glass ceiling of their rigid social order. Lyra broke the kiss, but she didn't let go. She turned to face the room, her arm still wrapped possessively around Jace's waist. Her face was flushed, her eyes blazing with a fierce, terrifying joy. She looked at Hanno, whose face had turned a pale shade of gray. "You wanted to know my policy on foreign relations?" Lyra asked, her voice ringing clear and strong. "This is it." She squeezed Jace's hand. "We are no longer a species that hides," she announced. "We are no longer a people who let corporations dictate who we can trust or who we can love." She gestured to the stunned room. "We are rebuilding this government, and we are doing it with new voices. I am appointing a new intercultural advisor to the High Council, someone who understands the outside world better than any of us." She looked up at Jace, a wicked spark returning to her eyes. "Jace, meet your new job." Jace blinked, looking from her to the terrified counselors. "Advisor?" Jace repeated, horror dawning on his face. "Wait, does that involve meetings?" "I am allergic to meetings and paperwork." "Lyra, I break out in hives if I have to read anything longer than a repair manual." "You will adapt," Lyra said, fighting a smile. "Consider it penance for making me think you were dead." "This is cruel and unusual punishment," Jace muttered, though his hand tightened around hers. "I should have stayed in the pod." The tension in the room broke, not with laughter, but with a collective exhale. The emissary was not a remote, icy figure anymore. She was alive, she was in love, and she was dangerous. Later, the silence of the garden was different. It wasn't the dead silence of the council room. It was the living, breathing hush of Tethys Prime at twilight. The garden was a private sanctuary grown from living crystal and bioluminescent moss, perched on the roof of the emissary's spire. Below them, the city of Othila was lighting up, a galaxy of stars floating on the ocean. Jace sat on a bench formed from woven coral, groaning softly as he stretched his injured leg. Lyra sat beside him, tracing the line of a bandage on his arm with a gentle finger. "So," Jace said, looking out at the skyline. "Advisor, does it pay well?" Lyra smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "The salary is negotiable," she said softly, "but the benefits package includes very personal compensation for pain and suffering." "I might be interested," Jace murmured. "I have a lot of suffering to claim." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the sky whales drift through the aurora overhead. "I used to come here when I was a candidate," Lyra said, her voice turning serious. "Before the exile, I would look at the city and tell myself that when I was air speaker, I would be untouchable. I thought wealth and power were armor. I thought if I stood high enough, no one could hurt me again." She looked at her hands, but it just made me numb. "Jace, it made me cold. I was safe, but I wasn't alive." Jace nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I get that," he said. "My dream was always a ship, just a small jumper, big enough for me and a toolbox. I thought if I could just keep moving, keep drifting between stations, I would be free, no attachments, no roots, just the void and the engines." He turned to her, his eyes dark and earnest. "But drifting is not freedom. Lyra, it is just being lost with a better view. I realized that in the cave, freedom means nothing if you have no one to come back to." He reached out, taking her hand. His rough, calloused fingers interlaced with her smooth, glowing ones. "We were both running," he said. "You were running to the top of the tower, and I was running to the edge of the map. But we were both just trying to outrun being lonely." Lyra turned to him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You saved me twice." "Jace," she whispered. "Once when you dragged me out of that market and gave me a ration bar," she continued. "When I screamed that I didn't need you, you saved my life then." She squeezed his hand. "And you saved me again when I finally admitted that I do need you. You saved my soul. You taught me that needing someone does not make you weak. It makes you strong enough to fight for them. Jace swallowed hard, the emotion thick in his throat. That sounds like a good title for a book, he joked weakly, trying to deflect the intensity. Shut up, Lyra said affectionately. She shifted, turning to face him fully. We need to talk about this, she said, gesturing between them, the bond, the neural link. Jace nodded. It is intense. Lyra, in the lab, when I sent you everything, it felt like I was pouring my brain into yours. It is dangerous, Lyra admitted. For my people, this kind of connection is usually reserved for life mates after years of bonding. Doing it this fast, with a human, it is boundary crossing. It is overwhelming. She looked at him with a fierce determination. But I do not want to sever it. I want to feel you, Jace. I want to know when you are happy, or hurting, or making a terrible joke before you even say it. Me too, Jace confessed. It is terrifying. It is like living with the volume turned up to 11. But the silence without it, it was unbearable. So we make rules, Lyra said. We approach this with honesty. We ask for consent before we open the door fully. We learn to be patient with the noise. We turn the boundary crossing into bridge building, Jace suggested. Lyra smiled. Exactly. She leaned in, and this time, the kiss was slow, deliberate. It was a question and an answer. As their lips met, Jace felt the hum of the implant, a soft, warm presence in the back of his mind. It wasn't a flood this time. It was a candle flame, steady and bright. I am here, it said. I am yours. The months that followed were a whirlwind of reform and restoration. Lyra and Jace did not stay in the Crystal Tower. They took the Ethelgard, now fully repaired and complaining loudly about the lack of vacation time, and traveled the Outer Rim. A montage of moments unfolded, stitching their lives together. On a mining station near the Nebula border, Lyra stood in a boardroom filled with Heliox executives who were sweating profusely. She slammed a ledger onto the table, not a weapon, but a contract. Fair wages, she said, her voice steely, safety protocols, and 20% of the profits go to the local community. Sign it, or I seize the mine. The executives looked at Jace, who was leaning against the wall cleaning his fingernails with a laser cutter. I would sign it, Jace advised casually. She gets cranky when she has to seize things. They signed. In the engineering bay of a refugee flotilla, Jace stood surrounded by a group of alien children. They were Teethai, human, and species Jace couldn't even name. They were covered in grease, staring at a pile of junk engine parts. See this? Jace said, holding up a rusted manifold. People call this trash. We call this opportunity. He showed them how to bypass the governor valve. A young Teethai girl, her markings flickering with concentration, adjusted the flow rate. The engine roared to life, purring like a kitten. The kids cheered. Jace grinned, wiping oil on his forehead. You are a natural, he told the girl. Do not let anyone tell you that you are just a spare part. Lyra watched from the doorway, her heart swelling until she thought it might burst. Then there were the quiet moments on the ship. The AI's one, had developed a new and irritating habit. Privacy mode engaged. The AI would announce suddenly while they were reviewing trade agreements in the lounge. Locking doors for emotional regulation maintenance. Open the door. 1, Lyra would shout, blushing a deep violet. We are working. My sensors detect elevated heart rates and pheromone spikes. The AI would reply smoothly. Work is contraindicated. I have dimmed the lights and cued a romantic playlist. You are welcome. Jace would just laugh, throwing his datapad on the couch. You know, Jace would say, pulling Lyra into his lap. The ship makes a compelling argument. Life lessons crystallized in these moments. They learned that strength wasn't about standing alone in a storm. It was about building a shelter big enough for the people you loved. They learned that wealth and power were just tools, meaningless until you risked them to protect someone else. And they learned that love, the messy, complicated, cross-species kind, had the power to reshape entire systems. It could turn a mechanic into a hero and an exiled princess into a savior. 1 year later, the viewing platform sat on the very edge of the atmosphere of Tethys Prime. It was a silent, open-air deck protected by a gravity field, offering a view that stretched to infinity. Below them, the planet glowed. It wasn't just the bioluminescence of the ocean anymore. It was the lights of the cities, connected, thriving, and free. Above them, the stars were a dusting of diamond dust on black velvet. Jace leaned against the railing, wearing a suit that was actually pressed, though he had loosened the tie. Lyra stood beside him, radiant in a gown of deep midnight blue. "We did it," Jace said softly. "The treaty is ratified. The council is stable. The Heliox remnants are gone." Lyra nodded. "It is done." She turned to him. "The High Council offered me a permanent seat today," she said. "Chancellor, it means staying here. It means running the government for the next 20 years. Jace looked at her. That is huge. "Lyra, you would be great at it." "I turned it down," Lyra said. Jace blinked. "You what?" "I turned it down," she repeated. "I told them I have served my time as the architect. Now I want to be the explorer." She gestured to the stars. "There are other worlds out there. Jace, other corporations exploiting people, other kids starving on stations who need someone to tell them they matter." She stepped closer, placing her hands on his chest. "I want to go out there. I want to use the Ethelgard not as a yacht, but as a sword. I want to find the trouble and fix it." She looked deep into his eyes. "But I will not go alone." She offered him a choice, the same one she had offered him in the lounge of the decaying station a lifetime ago. But this time, there was no money on the table, no job offer, only a hand. "Stay here and help them rebuild. Jace, you could be a hero on Tethys. You could have a statue." "Or?" Jace asked, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Or," Lyra whispered, "you can take a ship and roam the galaxy, with me at your side." Jace looked at the planet below. Safe, secure, boring. Then he looked at the stars. Dangerous, infinite, wild. Then he looked at Lyra. He laughed. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated freedom. "A statue?" Jace scoffed. "The pigeons would ruin it. Besides, I have always said this planet is too humid for my hair." He took her hand, interlacing their fingers. "Wherever you go. Lyra, trouble is going to follow. I mean, look at you. You are a magnet for chaos." He pulled her close, his other hand sliding around her waist. "And I would hate to miss the show." Lyra smiled, and it was brighter than the city below. "Then let's go find some trouble," she said. She leaned up, and he leaned down. They kissed, silhouetted against the vast beckoning dark of the universe. As their lips met, their neural implants synchronized perfectly. 2 heartbeats became one rhythm. 2 minds became one shared consciousness of love and adventure. Her bioluminescent markings flared a brilliant, steady violet, and Jace's own heart raced to match the pulse. Once, a starving girl had shouted, "I don't need you to protect her fragile heart from the pain of gratitude." She had run into the shadows to hide her shame. Now, she stepped into the future, rich not in the cold currency of credits or the hollow armor of influence, but in the things that truly mattered. She was rich in love, she was rich in trust, and she was rich in a chosen family she would fight across the stars to keep. Jace broke the kiss, resting his forehead against hers, ready for departure. Emissary? Lyra looked at the stars. Ready. Advisor. They turned and walked toward the waiting ship, leaving the safety of the world they saved for the promise of the galaxy they would change. Together,